The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus spoke this parable to his disciples. For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1. To each according to his ability. Then he went away. The one who had received the 5 talents went off at once and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you have handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy servant. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of my master. And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the one who had received the 1 talent came forward and saying, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master replied, You wicked and lazy slave, you knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow, and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to one who had with the 10 talents. For to all those who have, more will be given. They will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Lord Jesus Christ.
We see during this season in November, a lot of the readings have to do with the end times. And, we said the virgins with their oil in preparation, being well prepared. We see today's reading, St. Paul speaking of being prepared. We don't know the time or the hour. Certainly last week, remember that beautiful week of sunshine and warmth we had? It was almost like summer for a few days there. And then the snow hit, But we kind of knew it was coming because, St. Paul talks about the children of light, they anticipate. Well, if we're children of the Weather Channel, we knew that snow was coming. But again, the mood at the end of this liturgical year, we know that the liturgical year ends at the end of November, and when we begin a new liturgical year in Advent at the beginning of December. And so through this time, we're speaking of the end times in anticipation of the second coming, and certainly our second reading. That was the first thing I read when I was preparing this homily this week. And what stood out most was the notion of not falling asleep, but keeping awake and sober. I always initially default to thinking about the struggle of trying to stay awake when I'm tired. And this staying sober business. I like to drink a glass of wine now and again, a Scotch, truth be known, and not in the sense of overindulging, but somewhat regularly. And we all know that keeping awake literally is impossible when we need our sleep to do our jobs, to function properly. And if we go by the notion of everything in moderation, well, then and that Jesus and the apostles were known to take wine once in a while, certainly to celebrate social occasions and meals together. Well, we obviously know that St. Paul meant that in a different sense. What does it mean to be alert and vigilant and prepared and staying awake? And then I thought, in a way, what ways does St. Paul mean that? And then I thought immediately of, how do we stay alert? How do we keep on top of our game each day of our lives? And I thought, what's good is little gems of teaching, little life lessons every day that we can refer to and just ponder, We don't have to look. And then I thought of the Proverbs, of course. The Proverbs is a good way. Then I looked at the first reading, and it's from Proverbs, of course, And, Proverbs are great ways, great little gems of wisdom for us, which we can pray with and meditate over. Staying awake in the spiritual sense has nothing to do with sleep deprivation, but about nurturing a relationship with our God, with each other, and staying in touch with ourselves and life itself. As I said, this liturgical year is coming to an end. In November, readings speak of end times often, including today. We look at today's gospel. Matthew's addressing people who are fascinated or obsessed with the end times. We look at part of the motivation. Scholars say when Matthew wrote this gospel that he was addressing people who were really kind of expecting the end soon, and the second coming very soon, to the point where they were sitting on their hands. They're not really doing anything. They're waiting, right? Even St. Paul in his early ministry, was speaking in terms of, well, it could be any day now, So don't make any wedding plans. Don't buy a farm, those kinds of things. So today's reading in the gospel is about talents and using them. So Matthew is trying to dispel some of that thinking. He's trying to say, don't sit on your hands. There's work to be done. Somehow people had come to think that the second coming was just around the corner and it wasn't worth getting involved in life in this world anymore. But that's not the way God, our God, teaches us to live, no matter what our station or our stage of life is. Whether it's the second coming, whether it comes later today or in next year or the year after or years and years down the road, it will come. And it's not up to us to obsess about it or to spend a lot of time speculating on the timeline. We're called to live today. It's not the kind of vigilance that God in the gospel is referring to. So maybe it's a fear of getting involved because we feel a certain futility in the temporal world. Or maybe it's this, because we're afraid to take a risk. Maybe we hold back sometimes when we should be taking that risk because maybe we're afraid we might fail. Maybe we're afraid we're going to be hurt. Maybe it's part of the reason we may be tempted not to use the gifts we've been given. And when we can get busy in a way that we're not paying attention to our gifts. And sometimes finding out what our gifts are is by interacting with other people. I don't know about you, when you were kids and some of your friends, and maybe you were one of them, knew exactly what you were going to do for a career as you grew up. I had a couple of friends of mine. One said he was going to be an engineer in grade 3. Well, how do you know that? Well, he became an engineer. Well, his dad was an engineer too. And others, they say, well, I'm going to be a milkman. In the old days, when I was a kid, there were still milkmen around. And or we're going to be a mailman or a doctor or a lawyer. And, well, how do you know that in that early life? I was still in high school. I had no clue, And there's, many of us are like that too. We just don't know. And sometimes we just have to try something. Try anything. I did a number of jobs where I went to school and studied psychology for a while. Maybe And, I did a number of jobs. I worked for temporary manpower. That's a way to get experience, boy. Working for Hallmark cards, setting up displays, everything from that to painting houses to moving furniture to working at a rail yard and moving rail cars from trucks to trains, all kind of variety of stuff. But you start to learn more about yourself, what you could see yourself doing and what you couldn't see yourself doing, and interacting with people. You put yourself out there, and that's what we have to do. And using our gifts for the sake of others or just putting ourselves out there is more than about making it in society, more than about whether we succeed or fail at a particular task or in reaching out effectively and gaining results, more than about what people will think of us if we fail. It's about taking the risk simply because we care and we're trying to open ourselves up to where God is calling us. Reaching out to others and living them, loving them, is a risk because we risk being hurt. In our relationships, sometimes we hold back because we don't want to hurt someone or we don't want to be hurt. And by taking on a new project, well, we risk that it might fail. But none of this should stop us. There are countless ways of being an instrument of God's love in the world that don't require we be super intelligent, super productive, famous, world-renowned, the picture of physical health, beautiful, rich. It starts with loving and caring with whatever we have to offer. That makes all the difference. It's recognizing and allowing ourselves to experience God's mercy and care. It's in that experience for us that we are able to then do the same for others. We allow ourselves to be taken care of by God. Do we allow ourselves to trust in a God who cares for us? Because it's in that we're able to share that caring with others. I'm going to take care of others the way God's taking care of me. What is asked is that we avail ourselves to those in need, and it starts by recognizing need where it exists and reaching out without regard for getting paid back. What do I get out of this? What's my reward? It starts by doing it freely, whether or not we think the person we're helping deserves it or not. What we're ultimately able to do may not be earth-shattering in the world's eyes, but the gospel message urges us to do something. There'll be some that'll produce 100-fold, some 10-fold, some less. But God has invested in us, not so that we can just sit in our hands. That's not the kind of waiting for the second coming that God is talking about. He wants us to be awake and active. Yes, we're called to be awake, waiting, and vigilant, and we do that through our involvement in our relationships and engagement with life itself. We're not called to be obsessed by the timing of it all, but to live each moment of our lives in the presence of God, and in accepting and adapting to the circumstances in which we find ourselves. For many of our people, elder and otherwise, who are alone during this pandemic, involvement in life is through a patience and long-suffering, giving God praise for having gifted us with life itself, regardless of our circumstance. Whether we're pondering the Proverbs in prayerful reflection or reaching out to another person out of concern, we're nurturing a caring heart. And in that way, we're using our talents. And as tiring as this pandemic is, with the help of God, may we persevere in caring and preserving in our gratitude for the gift of life. So as we prepare to celebrate Eucharist together, we're mindful that our Lord gives himself to us so that we may give ourselves to those around us. And it doesn't have to be anything dramatic or fancy, but our disposition of heart of reaching out, taking a chance, reaching out to one another is all important. We may not be able to do a lot during this pandemic, but we can still care, and we can pray, and we can be in touch with those who perhaps are struggling as much or more than we are. And so in that, we are doing God's work, and we're using the talents that God has given us. So let's be grateful. Let's ask for the grace of perseverance during these challenging times. Continue to be the people that God is calling us to be.